Okay, so today I'm going to show you how to do a full in-depth kind of foundation routine, and I'm going to give lots of tips and tricks for different types of foundation, different brushes, different techniques you can use to make your foundation last longer, all sorts of tips. Obviously this is how I do my foundation, there's loads of different ways. I'm going to go into some of the different ways, but obviously I'll only be showing you one way because I can only do my foundation once. But I just thought I'd go into as much detail as I can purely about foundation first, before I go on and like do all eyes and stuff like that. So my face is freshly washed and toned, and the most important thing I think is to moisturise before you do your makeup. You don't have to use any expensive moisturisers, there's so many moisturisers you can get now for cheap. The one I'm going to use is this simple one, it's just this day cream. This is a cream type, so it's quite thick. You can get kind of lighter types which are more liquidy. Obviously it depends on your skin type. You can get an oil-free one as well, obviously, if you're really oily, or you can get quite heavy ones if you're really dry. Just find one that works for you. You take into your skin type into consideration, and I just think everything goes on better on top of moisturiser because it hydrates the skin, you know, it makes it a lot smoother, it just makes everything glide on softer. Okay, so once I've actually got the moisturiser on, because I use a thick one, I like to let it sink in. If I was using just a really runny thin one, then I'd probably go ahead straight with my foundation. Now because that's quite thick, I can still feel it kind of leaving my skin a bit tacky. So I'm going to let that sink in. I'm going to go ahead and do my eye makeup and then come back to the skin. Okay, so as you can see, I've just done my eye makeup. I've not done under my eyes and I've not done my eyebrows yet, because those are the things I like to do after my foundation. So, to start with is priming, and I have very strong opinions on priming, because I feel like everywhere you look, everyone's telling you that you need a primer, and I don't think everybody does need a primer. Some people do need a primer, but not everyone. I mean, they're just, people are trying to sell them to you to waste your money, basically, to get more money. I mean, I don't need a primer. I've got normal skin. I don't really have enlarged pores, and even if I did, I don't think I'd use a primer for that, because they're not the end of the world, are they? My makeup stays in place. You know, I'm not oily. I do get a bit dry sometimes, but that's what the moisturiser's for. So, you know, sometimes you might need to use a primer if you do have really big pores and you really do want to get rid of them. Then go ahead and use a primer. Or, you know, if you're really oily and you want to mattify the skin, then that's fine. But just think about your skin first before you go ahead and just think, oh, I must get a primer before I put my foundation on. Just really evaluate your skin first before you go ahead and spend money on a primer that you might not necessarily need. Okay, so for my foundation, I'm going to use the NARS Sheer Glow. This is not really that sheer. I'd say it's a medium to full. You can get a really quite full coverage out of this. And the glow, it is glowy in a nice way, but if you're oily, you don't need to be like, no, they do make a matte one if you really are oily and you don't like glow at all. But if you want to look naturally dewy, then I definitely recommend this foundation. It's definitely my favourite foundation. And the brush I'm going to use with this is a flat top synthetic kabuki brush. This one is the Zoeva 104 buffer brush. There's lots of different brushes you can use. These are my favourite, because if you use a typical foundation brush like this one, it's got face paint on. I use these for face paint. They leave streaks on the face, and I prefer to buff things in rather than just wiping it across the face. So that's why I prefer these brushes. You can also use a sponge or a stippling brush. They're both good options. A sponge, you want to get the foundation on the bottom of the sponge and just bounce it into the skin like that. And a stippling brush would be something like this, where you press it into the skin again instead of buffing. You can buff over afterwards, but these dense bristles are made for pressing into the skin. So I've just popped a tiny bit on the back of my hand. this foundation doesn't come with a pump, so if you are doing it in terms of pumps, I'd say one pump is plenty, and it's so much better to go back and add more foundation than pile a load on and then you're like, well, what am I going to do with this? Because especially even after you add powder, it's going to be even worse. So I'm just taking a bit on the brush, and I'm just going to, because the first dot you get on your brush is always going to be too much, and that's covered my whole face pretty much. So I've just zoomed in a bit, and then what I do is I start patting, and with me personally, I push it into the skin in areas where I need it most, which to me is obviously, as you can see here, all my cheeks are red and I've got a red nose. So I push it in to the cheeks. Then when I get further out here, I start just buffing it, just to give a lighter coverage, because I don't want too much fullness, full coverage all over the face. I just want full coverage just where I need it. And again, just pressing it in. And you want to avoid this under eye area, because obviously we're going to put concealer there. And if you put foundation and concealer under your eyes, that's when it tends to crease, because there's too much product under there. So if you're trying to avoid that with foundation and only going with concealer, then that makes it a lot better in terms of creasing and avoiding it looking too cakey. And again, I'll push it over the nose. And I'll take a dab more for my forehead, because I've got a big forehead. And I'll just, again, buff it there, because I don't need as much coverage there. Make sure to go in between the eyebrows. And the reason I don't do my eyebrows before my foundation is because I like to actually go over them, just so there's no line of demarcation from, like, if you're trying to avoid the eyebrows, as close as you try to get, there's probably still going to be a tiny little line where you can see. So I'll just go over the eyebrows, and then you can brush them through afterwards with a spoolie to get rid of, like, the excess foundation in your brows. Then whatever's left on the back of my hand, you can see that there's still some left. I'm just going to pop that back in where I said I needed it more. And I don't personally take it down my neck. I don't think you should have to take it down the neck if you got the right colour, but I know how hard that can be, especially if you're buying from like Superdrug or Boots, like those type of brands. Obviously it's hard to get the perfect colour, they don't have as many shades. So if your colour is slightly off, then do take it down the neck to make sure it blends. Or say if you're wearing, like, you've got fake tan on but not on your face, just make sure everything blends. But if you're wearing the correct shade, which I feel like this is, then you shouldn't need to take it down the neck. And then I'm just gonna keep pressing that into the skin. And you can see that's really evened out the skin, but I don't look like I'm caked in foundation. And you can still see a few little red bits, but I'd rather have a few red bits showing than be full on, you know, look like I'm wearing a mask. And there's always concealer to cover things up as well. It's better to kind of spot conceal rather than just go in with a really full coverage all over the face. So next, I'm just going to go ahead and do my eyebrows, because I like to let the foundation sink in so I can see which bits kind of need a bit extra coverage after the foundation sunk into the skin. So I can go ahead with some more concealer. So I'm just going to fill in my eyebrows, and then we'll come back and do the concealer. Okay, so next I'll go in and do my under eye concealer, and if you need to, go ahead with a concealer on the face. I personally, you know, I've not got any breakouts at the minute. The redness on my cheeks I can deal with. I can kind of bring my under eye concealer down a little bit. But if you do need to go in with the concealer, go in with a thicker kind of full coverage concealer and just dab over lightly in any areas that you might need extra coverage. For my under eye concealer, I'm going to use a full coverage concealer because I have really bad under eyes. I get up early most mornings, you know, I get up about 4 o'clock most mornings. So I use the MAC Pro Longwear Concealer, which is a full coverage concealer, and I'll just take one pump of this on my finger, and I'll just go like that, so they get about the same amount on each finger, and then just run it under the eyes. You want to choose, obviously, if you're darker than me, you might want to highlight. This is a slight highlight for me, but not really, you know. This is an NW15, I'm normally an NC15, so there's a slight colour difference, but it's not loads darker. I'll just pop a bit around my nose as well, and I've still got a bit left on my fingers, so I do tend to just pop that on my chin. If you want to highlight, you can pop it on the nose, on the forehead, kind of along here. I don't do my nose because I've got a crooked nose, I don't want to draw too much attention to it, and I've already got a big forehead, so I don't want to draw too much attention to that. So I just do it under the eyes and on my chin. and this is where I use a sponge. You could use a typical concealer brush, which would look like this, but again with the foundation brush it leaves the streaks, it kind of rubs it off the skin rather than into the skin. Or you could use kind of a fluffy brush like an eyeshadow brush to blend it in, or you could use all these brushes, a synthetic brush, which I'm not quite sure where mine is at the minute, but just like the foundation, just maybe a bit smaller, just to push it in like we did with the foundation. But I'm going to use a sponge because it adds hydration and moisture and also removes too much excess, so if you have packed a lot on then it will just remove that excess for you so you don't look too cakey. So push into the skin. So if you do want to do the highlight method, I'd recommend going 2, maybe 3 shades lighter, but I'd say 2 probably. You don't want it to be too intense. And if you are highlighting, don't bring it any further than the nostril, I'd say. I've brought mine down here because I want to conceal around the nose, and mine's not too much of a dramatic highlight. But if you do, I would say kind of steer clear of any lower than that because that can drag the face down. So I'm just going to push that into the skin. And make sure to get this inner corner, because most people tend to get dark in there. And you can also use this to kind of pat, if you haven't done a winged eyeliner, just pat it right underneath, and that can clean up and make that eyeliner a bit more sharp. Okay, so then depending on your skin type, this prolonged concealer is not supposed to crease. On me, I still prefer to set it, even though it says it's not going to crease, I don't trust it. So I'm going to set it with a translucent powder. If you're highlighting and stuff, you do want to use a translucent powder. If you use, unless you want to use a lighter powder that matches the lightness of the concealer, obviously because you don't want to change the colour of the concealer. That's what happens to me quite often. So it looks like it might be a highlight now, but once I put the powder on, it does darken again. So I'm just going to use any loose translucent powder. So I like to take a small brush because I just set under the eyes, just to prevent that creasing. It depends on your skin type. If you're oily, you might want to set all over the face with a light dusting. I'd recommend always going lighter than what you think you need. Like if you want really matte skin, you just want to pack powder all over, just do a really light dusting, and then you can take the powder out with you and do touch-ups throughout the day, rather than just packing a load of powder on and then looking too cakey. So just dab it under the eyes. And obviously you can use a bigger brush if you are doing all over the face, but because I'm just doing under the eyes, I'm just going to use a nice small brush. And I take a bit just around the nose here because I just get a bit oily and my foundation tends to slip just around that area of my nose. And when you're originally applying the powder, you want to begin in pushing motions to push the powder into the product. And then once you've applied the powder, go ahead and sweep over it, and this will remove the excess, so you've not got too much powder sitting on the skin. And this is where I go in and do the under eyes, and then I'll come back and do the contour and blush and all that stuff. So I'll just quickly do that, and then I'll show you how I contour, bronzer, blush, highlight, all of that stuff. But basically this is the foundation and the concealer, the base done. So it's, you know, you have to pay quite a lot of attention because that's how it can go wrong. I think foundation is probably the most important thing to me to get right. You know, it can easily go wrong. You can easily look cakey. It could be the wrong colour, the wrong tone, wrong coverage, wrong for your skin type. You really have to think about it. So especially if you're going ahead and buying an expensive foundation, like, you really want to make sure you buy the right one before spending all your money on something that's just not going to be right and just going to make you look worse. So really think about it and just really, I think, concentrate on where you need foundation. You don't need to put it all over the face. You just want to even out the skin without looking too flat and, you know, like, again, like you're wearing a mask. So that's the end of my foundation routine. So you can see I've got, you know, a nice full coverage face. I look like, you can tell I'm wearing makeup. I'm not going to say, you know, it looks natural, it looks like I'm not wearing makeup. Obviously I'm wearing foundation, but, you know, I'm not caked, I'm not ultra matte and flat. You know, I've got dewiness in the skin and I've got colour, and I don't look like I've just got cement and just poured it all over my face. So this is how I feel foundation should look. It should, you should be able to see your skin. It's your skin, but better, it evens out the skin tone. You shouldn't remove your skin tone, you shouldn't remove all your skin. You shouldn't remove all your skin, basically. It's to even out the skin that you have got, not to give you a completely new canvas. So I'll just zoom in so you can see up close what the foundation looks like. Obviously, you know, it might look brilliant from far away, but obviously you might think, oh, I bet she's got some pores around here or anything like that, or creasing under the eye. So I'll just zoom in and let you see the foundation up close. Okay, so that's as close as I can get without it keep going in and out of focus. But, you know, you can still see that, you know, it's not caked on. And, you know, there we go. It's not a really thick layer of foundation, and it's nice and smooth. So yeah, that's my foundation routine, top tips and tricks for creating a nice flawless face. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I will see you in my next video.